He handed me a glass of wine, his smile too wide, his voice too smooth. "Special vintage, just for you," he said, but something in his eyes gave it away. A flicker, a tension, and when I looked down, I saw the faint swirl of something extra in the drink. I didn't flinch. I just smiled, thanked him, and switched glasses when no one was looking. 45 minutes later, he was the one turning pale, clutching his stomach, rushing to the bathroom. And across the table, his wife, the one who tried to poison me, realized she'd made a fatal mistake. I knew. And now, so did she. My name is Ethan Callahan. I'm 34 years old, and I make my living behind the lens, capturing truth in fleeting moments, chasing stories that most people overlook. I live in Boulder, Colorado, and for the last decade, I've carved out a modest but respected career as a documentary filmmaker. I've shot everything from endangered wolves in Montana to grassroots health movements in Nairobi. It's not glamorous work, but it's honest, and it pays the bills if you know how to hustle. I married Isabel 3 years ago. She's smart, compassionate, and grounded, working as a public health researcher focused on rural communities. We live in a modest craftsman home just outside downtown, the kind of place with worn wood floors and mugs that never match. We're happy. Or at least, we were, until our parents entered the picture. Charles and Meredith Langston never approved of me, not really. Charles is a senior partner at a massive law firm in Denver. Meredith runs charity events and appears on society pages, always smiling like she owns the air in the room. To them, I was always the artist, a polite way of saying, not one of us. At family dinners, Charles would ask questions that sounded like challenges. "Still doing the freelance thing, huh?" Or, "You ever think about getting a real job?" Meredith was worse. She'd smother Isabel in compliments while introducing me to guests as Ethan, the photographer, careful to avoid the word husband. Isabel would just squeeze my hand under the table, her way of saying, "I know. I'm sorry." I learned to play along, bring the good wine, nod through the lectures, smile for the photos. I thought if I could just endure it, time would fix everything. I was wrong. They didn't want to accept me. They wanted to erase me. And I didn't know it yet, but they were about to try. It started on a Sunday, Meredith's 65th birthday dinner, held at the Langston's sprawling colonial estate in the hills just outside Denver. I had just gotten back from a week filming bison migrations in Yellowstone, snow-blind, sleep-deprived, and aching in every joint. All I wanted was to crash in bed and process footage, but Isabel insisted we go. "Just a couple hours," she promised, slipping her hand into mine, "and we can leave." I didn't want to disappoint her, so I showered, dressed in my best button-down, and drove us up into the manicured hills of her parents' gated world. The moment we walked in, I knew something was off. Meredith greeted us with her usual brittle smile, and Charles offered a handshake that felt like a business deal. The dining room was lit like a stage. Candles, polished silver, crystal glasses. They always threw these dinners like performances, and we were expected to play our parts. Dinner began predictably enough. Charles bragged about a recent corporate merger. Meredith fawned over Isabel's newest publication but barely acknowledged me. Isabel's brother Owen and his wife Vanessa made polite small talk, clearly trying to keep the mood neutral. I was nursing a glass of water when Meredith stood, smoothed her dress, and announced, "I've prepared something special for dessert." My signature spiced sangria. She disappeared into the kitchen. A few minutes later, I followed, offering to help. That's when I saw it. Meredith stood with her back to me, carefully pouring a clear liquid from a tiny vial into a single glass. The motion was deliberate, practiced. When she turned and saw me, her expression barely flickered. "Oh, Ethan," she said sweetly, holding out the glass. "This one's for you. Special vintage, just for you." Something in her voice chilled me. I took both glasses without blinking. "Let me help carry these," I said. Back in the dining room, Charles was scrolling his phone. I set the doctored glass in front of him, handed the untouched one to Owen, and took a seat. No one noticed the switch except Meredith. Her eyes followed mine, and I saw it then. The realization, the fear. The moment she knew, I knew. Dinner went on like nothing was wrong, at least for everyone else. Charles ranted about inflation. Meredith gushed about an upcoming charity auction. I sat quietly, sipping water, feeling the seconds stretch like rubber bands. I kept glancing at the glass in front of Charles. He drank slowly, almost bored, like the wine was beneath him. 45 minutes in, he suddenly went quiet. His face turned ashy, his forehead beaded with sweat, and he loosened his collar. A few seconds later, he excused himself, lurching to the hallway bathroom. Then came the sound. Violent retching. Furniture creaked as he knocked something over. Meredith shot up from her seat like a puppet pulled by strings. "Charles?" she called out, voice tight. "Is everything okay?" I stayed seated, calmly finishing my slice of cake, chewing slowly. Owen and Vanessa looked alarmed. Isabel, concerned, rushed to check on her father. But I didn't move. I just watched Meredith. Her face was frozen, eyes darting toward the bathroom, then to the dining table, then back to me. She knew. I could see it in her face. I didn't say a word, just locked eyes with her across the table, giving her nothing to hold on to. The woman who spent years trying to erase me from her daughter's life had just poisoned her own husband, and she knew I'd seen it happen. The rest of the night was chaos. Charles insisted it was shellfish or maybe a stomach bug. Meredith tried to play along, but her hands trembled as she poured water. I stayed quiet, offered to help Isabel clean up, and slipped the untouched glass, the one meant for me, into a padded camera case. No one noticed. Not that night. But everything had shifted. Meredith had crossed a line, and I had no intention of letting it go. Not with a smile. Not with silence. That night, something broke. And I knew exactly how to respond. Not with rage, but with proof. Cold, undeniable truth. The next morning, I called Dr. Ruben Patel, a former interview subject from a documentary I'd done on forensic toxicology. He owed me a favor. I didn't explain much, just said I had a sample that needed testing and that it was urgent. I dropped the glass off that afternoon in a padded box marked fragile, careful not to smudge the rim. Ruben didn't ask questions, just raised an eyebrow and said, "You always find the weirdest stories, Ethan." 3 days later, he called me back, his voice low and serious. "Benzodiazepines," he said. "Heavy dose. Not lethal, but enough to knock someone out, maybe even cause short-term memory issues." I thanked him, asked for a printed report, and hung up. I sat in my studio in silence for a long time, the test results clutched in my hand. So it was true. Meredith Langston, my mother-in-law, had tried to drug me. But I didn't tell Isabel. Not yet. I needed more than a lab report. I needed a pattern, a motive, a history. Something undeniable. Meredith was too good at playing innocent, too polished in public. If I accused her now, she'd flip the narrative before Isabel could even process what I was saying. I knew how these people worked. Gaslighting was a family sport. So instead, I made calls, sent quiet messages, edged off a few old instincts from my investigative days. That's when Vanessa, Owen's wife, reached out to me. "I have something you should see," she said. We met in a coffee shop the next morning. She slid a USB drive across the table. "Home security footage from Meredith's kitchen," she whispered. "I started saving clips after what she did to me 3 years ago. You're not the first person she's tried to push out of this family." At night, I plugged in the drive and watched. What I saw made my stomach turn. Meredith, pouring from the same vial, yelling at Charles after the dinner, blaming him for drinking the wrong glass, screaming, "This isn't the first time." I rewound that clip 5 times. She'd said it herself. This wasn't the first time. I stayed up most of that night watching the rest of the footage. My studio was dark except for the flicker of the monitor and the soft hum of my hard drive backing everything up. I took notes, time-stamped moments, paused when Meredith's voice cracked through the kitchen audio. This isn't the first time. It wasn't just what she said. It was how she said it. Frantic, furious, like she'd lost control of a plan that was supposed to be perfect. Then came the next clip, later that same night. Meredith in the living room, pacing in a silk robe, glass of wine in hand, ranting at Charles. He's ruining everything. I've already started talking to Isabel about their marriage. Little things, just enough. Soon she'll think it's her idea to leave him. Charles didn't argue. He just nodded, exhausted. Then maybe it's time, he said, like this was normal, like breaking apart their daughter's marriage was a chore they did together. I couldn't stop shaking. Not from fear, but from the realization that this went deeper than I imagined. Meredith wasn't just cruel. She was calculating. And Charles wasn't clueless. He was complicit. They weren't trying to protect Isabel. They were trying to control her. Her entire life. Every relationship. Every decision. Anyone who supported her independence got eliminated. Quietly. Under the guise of concern, Vanessa had been right. She showed me photos, emails, old party invitations she was suddenly left out of. She told Owen I was unstable, that I was draining him emotionally. It worked for a while. I felt sick, not just for me, but for Isabel, for all the invisible strings her parents had tied around her life, and for how close they came to making her believe they were just trying to help. But now I had proof, not a hunch, not paranoia, real footage, a lab report, a pattern. And it wasn't just about defending myself anymore. It was about showing Isabel the truth before they destroyed something else, something we were still trying to build. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for us. Over the next week, I became obsessed with connecting the dots. I made a spreadsheet. Names, dates, connections, all orbiting around the Langstons. I reached out to Isabel's old college roommate, a woman named Lauren, who said something that made my skin crawl. I loved Belle, but her mom made it impossible. Meredith once told me to let her grow out of me. Then I found Thomas, Isabel's ex-fiancé, the one her parents never talked about. He was hesitant to speak at first, but when I told him who I was and what had happened, his tone shifted. "They did it to you too?" he asked. Then he told me everything. Meredith had planted fake texts and photos that made it look like he was cheating. Isabel believed it at the time. When he tried to explain, she wouldn't take his calls. "It wrecked me," he said quietly, but she looked so heartbroken, I let it go. The pattern was undeniable. Meredith weaponized doubt, isolation, emotional pressure disguised as maternal concern. Anyone who nurtured Isabel's independence became a threat, and that included Isabel herself. I found more examples. Isabel's best friend from grad school who suddenly stopped visiting. The therapist she stopped seeing after just 2 sessions. Meredith called her a fraud. The colleague whose promotion Isabel passed up because her mother made her question whether it was a stable path. I had enough evidence now to fill a case file, so I started organizing everything. Emails from doctors showing Meredith's overlapping Xanax prescriptions from 3 different clinics, voicemails full of backhanded concern, texts from Charles instructing staff to make Vanessa feel less welcome at a family charity event. This wasn't parental worry, it was generational control. And they'd done it so often, for so long, that they didn't even see it as wrong anymore. They just saw it as necessary. But now, I had them in the light. For the first time, their whispers, secrets, and guilt trips had a paper trail. The truth wasn't just something I believed. It was something I could prove. And now, it was time to show Isabel. I waited until everything was airtight, every video backed up, every file cataloged, every piece of evidence printed and sealed in a folder labeled Truth. Then I invited them over. A family dinner at our home. Something casual. Just Isabel, Owen, Vanessa, Charles, and Meredith. Isabel didn't question it. She thought it was my way of extending an olive branch. And in a way it was. just not the one they expected. The night started politely, laughter over wine, Meredith complimenting the centerpiece, Charles asking about my latest project, and then I stood up. "There's something I want to share," I said. Picking up the remote, I turned on the TV and hit play. At first, no one said a word. The footage spoke for itself. Meredith in the kitchen, slipping the vial into the wine, then later yelling at Charles when he drank the wrong glass. "This isn't the first time," she screamed on the screen. Then came the living room footage. Her pacing, wine in hand, whispering, "Soon she'll want the divorce. She'll think it's her idea." Isabel went pale. Her fork slipped from her hand and hit the plate with a soft clang. "Is this?" she whispered. I didn't answer. I just kept playing clip after clip, Meredith badmouthing Vanessa, Charles instructing staff to create distance, emails from doctors, testimony from Thomas, prescription overlaps. The room fell into stunned silence. Finally, Meredith broke. "This is edited," she said, voice trembling. "He's trying to frame me." Charles tried to recover, clearing his throat. "Isabel, don't let him manipulate." "Stop," Isabel snapped, her voice shaking. "Just stop." Her eyes were full of tears, but her jaw was set. "I believed you my whole life. I doubted people I loved because of you. But this is sick." Vanessa reached over and held her hand. Owen looked down at the table in disbelief. Meredith looked ready to collapse. Charles looked cornered. And I felt none of the vindication I expected. Just relief. For once, Isabel saw what I had seen all along, and she believed me. The days that followed felt like walking through an emotional minefield. Quiet, tense, but different. The silence between Isabel and her parents was deafening, and yet for the first time it wasn't loaded with guilt. It was filled with clarity. Meredith didn't call. Charles sent one email trying to reframe everything as a difficult misunderstanding. Isabel didn't reply. Then, 2 weeks later, Charles invited me to his office for lunch. "Just us. I respect what you did," he said, offering me a glass of scotch. "You protected my daughter. That's what a man should do." I knew what he was trying to do. Reclaim some authority, offer a peace treaty as long as he could still hold the pin. "You ever think about working with us?" he asked. "We could use someone with your instincts, big salary, stability, future." I set my glass down, untouched. "You don't get to buy your way into my life," I said, "and you sure as hell don't get to define my value." The smile fell from his face like a dropped mask. "This isn't about money," I continued. "It's about control, and I'm not playing that game." I left his office with no regrets. Weeks passed. Then, without warning, a certified letter arrived in our mailbox. No return address, just a corporate law firm seal. Inside was a deed transfer, our house, paid in full, and a legal trust established in our unborn child's name. No note, no signature, just paperwork. Clean, clinical, final. I showed Isabel. She stared at it for a long time, then said quietly, "This isn't love. It's leverage they know they can't use anymore." I nodded. We accepted the house, but not the narrative. We'd earned this life. Not through their approval, but through endurance. 6 months later, our daughter Eliza was born, and when Meredith and Charles came to visit at the hospital, they stayed 15 minutes. No lectures, no advice. Just nervous smiles and a teddy bear. As they left, Isabel squeezed my hand. "They'll never change," she said. "No," I replied. "But they know now. We have." Spring brought a quiet kind of joy. The kind you don't post online or toast with champagne, but the kind that settles deep in your bones. Eliza was born just as the wildflowers bloomed across the foothills outside Boulder. She had Isabel's eyes and my stubborn jaw, and from the moment I held her, something inside me clicked into place. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something that couldn't be touched by lies or control. That summer, I opened my first gallery downtown, a space filled with images from Yellowstone, Uganda, and everywhere in between. Friends came, clients came, even strangers wandered in from the street and stayed longer than they meant to. On opening night, Isabel stood beside me, Eliza in her arms, and I felt like everything they tried to take from me had grown back stronger. Toward the end of the night, Charles and Meredith arrived. Late as always, Charles looked around at the photos on the walls, the crowd, the quiet respect in the room. "Impressive," he said, shaking my hand. "You did all this?" "Every frame," I replied. He nodded. Meredith hovered beside him, silent. She looked older than I remembered, tired, like a ghost of the woman who once tried to dismantle my life with a drop of liquid and a forced smile. They didn't stay long. Meredith held Eliza briefly, under Isabel's watchful eye. Charles complimented a piece from my Alaska series. And then they left. No drama, no parting shots. Later that night, Isabel and I sat on our porch, barefoot, wrapped in blankets, watching the stars over the mountains. "Do you think they've really changed?" she asked. I thought for a moment, then shook my head. "No," I said. "But they've finally accepted that they can't change us." She leaned her head against my shoulder. "That's enough." And it was. I didn't need them to say sorry. I didn't need revenge or validation. What I needed, I had. A woman who saw me, a daughter who would grow up free, and a life that I'd build without asking anyone's permission. They tried to erase me with subtle words and poisoned wine, to write me out of a story they thought they controlled. But I didn't fight them with anger. I fought with truth, patience, and a camera lens. In the end, I didn't win by yelling louder. I won by living better, by protecting what mattered, by choosing love over approval and peace over performance. Our family doesn't look like theirs, and that's the point. I didn't need their respect to have worth. I just needed to stop asking for it. Sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming untouchable on your own terms. The lesson in this story is simple but powerful. Control often hides behind smiles, and sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones quietly pulling your strings. Ethan didn't fight fire with fire. He fought with patience, evidence, and quiet courage. He chose truth over drama, and by doing so, he not only saved his marriage, but also protected the future of his family. This story isn't just about betrayal. It's about reclaiming your voice, refusing to be erased, and building a life on your own terms. If you've ever felt unseen, underestimated, or pushed aside, know this: you don't need permission to protect your peace. You don't need validation from the people trying to break you, and you sure as hell don't need to play a game that was rigged against you from the start. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone who needs to hear it, like, share, and subscribe. We tell stories that speak truth, spark strength, and give voice to the battles no one sees. Your support helps us keep telling them. And remember, sometimes the quietest revenge is living well, with nothing to prove.